Hello, good morning. My name is Shlomo. I was born here in Jaffa. I grew up in a great green valley, the valley of Armageddon. So I had a privilege in my childhood as a teenager to play, to work, and to live down below Nazareth. I know this place. I've been living here. I know the language. I know exactly the tradition that Jesus lived 2,000 years ago. It's like I'm coming from the same heritage. I'm coming from the same history. We have the same holidays. We went to the same synagogues. I understand Jesus. Maybe not from the religious point of view, but definitely from the spiritual point of view. By the way, I said my name was Shlomo. Shlomo is the name of King Salomon in Hebrew. So this is my heritage, this is my background, and I'd like to go with you guys through a series of videos, visiting places and talking about the meaning of those stories in the New Testament in Jesus' life, and check and find how it is related to me, to you, to our lives. This is like the beginning. Should I continue? Okay. Scholars usually divide Jesus' life into three parts. Actually more, but for us simple people, three parts. The first part of Jesus' life is the longest one, about 30 years. It's called the unknown part. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, as you remember, and he grew up in Nazareth, not far from here, on the mountain. His childhood was very interesting, but we'll leave that for another chapter. So 30 years of unknown, because we have very little information, at least in the New Testament. We can check and look in other books, in proto-gospels, etc., but we don't have a lot of information about Jesus in the New Testament. The second part of Jesus' life is about 2-3 years in the Galilee. This is the public life. This is when he's becoming known. This is the time that he's performing all the miracles, starting in Cana with the wine and water and wine, and the rest of it around the Sea of Galilee. This is the part that he finds human beings to follow him. I will make you fishers of men. This is the part he's becoming well known all over, in this part of the world and outside. The third part of Jesus' life is 1 week in Jerusalem. From Palm Sunday, coming down the Mount of Olives towards Jerusalem, until the Sunday that his body was not found in the tomb. So we're talking about 30 years, 3 years public life, and 1 week in Jerusalem. So what's the whole deal about the mountain behind me? Mount Tabor in Hebrew, or the Mount of Transfiguration, as you know it, guys. We're talking about a very strong experience that the disciples went through. Let me remind you, some of them left their families. Some of them left home. Jesus encouraged them. Leave your parents, leave your families behind, follow me. And the chosen ones, the lucky ones, the privileged ones, really left everything behind and stuck to Jesus, lived with him, walked with him, listened to him, and had a lot of transformations. One of those moments is right here on Mount Tabor. Jesus and 3 of his disciples walk up to the top of the mountain, and suddenly they look at him and they see his face change, clothing, everything became white. There was a halo of white around him. And more than that, they had Moses on one side of him and Prophet Elijah on the other side. Moses and Prophet Elijah, Jewish leadership, top leadership ever in history, prophecy, are actually giving the disciples the, if you want, like the battery charger. Yes, you chose the right thing. Yes, this is the man. Yes, this is the moment. Now you're ready to go to Jerusalem. So we are now talking about this very little gap between the second part and the third part of Jesus' life. After 3 years of following Jesus, and you know what? Let me tell you the truth. It was not easy for some of them. Not at all easy for some of them. You know, you're following him, and you listen to his preaching, and you see miracles, yes, every once in a while. You say, hey, yeah, did you see that? It's amazing, he's the one. But you have those doubts inside, and I'm talking to each and every one of us. Don't we all have some doubts? Yeah, we chose the woman, we chose the man, we got married, we chose the priest or the reverend, we chose the church or the denomination that we belong to, we chose the group, the social group, the city, the town, the philosophical way that we chose. And sometimes we have doubts. Sometimes we're not sure. Maybe, who knows? Sometimes it doesn't work. We follow a lot of gurus. We go to movies. We read books. And sometimes it seems that it is not the one. It's not the way. Maybe we were wrong. Maybe the whole way we did is not the way. How can we tell? Jesus' disciples were lucky because they go up to the mountain and they get that proof from God and from Moses and Elijah. You know, like leadership and prophecy are giving the stamp in Jesus' visa or passport. Yes, you can go to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is not easy. It's not the Galilee. You're like the farmers or the carpenters or the stone chiselers in the north. You're like low class of people. Jerusalem is the rich place. This is where the Hellenized Jews are. This is where the Jewish king is. This is where the Roman Empire is. This is the temple and the priest. This is where they're looking for you to catch you, to hang you, to crucify you. That's not as easy as it was up here in the Galilee. So they needed to fill the battery. They needed to charge the battery. And they were lucky to have it outside, to have the light coming upon Jesus and having an answer. Yes, we are on the right track. You and me not always have that sign outside. We need to look for it inside. We want to go and look for the divine answer within ourselves. Each and every one of us. Some people would go for a year or two to look for it. Some people it would take 10 or 20 years. Some people whole lifetime and maybe more. Yet we would not most probably have the outside sign. We would need to look for it inside. Go in, breathe, imagine, see, and then choose according to the answer that is given to you. Maybe there is some message for you. Maybe there is some symbol that would come in the middle of the night or waking up in the morning. Maybe somebody would say something and say, hey, yes, this is it. I'm on the right track. So this is what we're talking about, the transfiguration that each and every one of us can go through in his life if we search inside. Thank you very much. So if we said that we are in between the second and the third part of Jesus' life, Mount of Transfiguration, like charging the battery, now what's left is to go down to Jerusalem. It's frightening some. You know, Jesus himself was not sure. He was dedicated. He was clear about his journey. The disciples followed him, but there were some doubts. There was some fear maybe. A lot of psychology involves in those little stories in the New Testament. From here, they go down to Jericho and up to Jerusalem. How do you walk to Jerusalem? Not straight through Samaria, because there were Samaritans there. It's not a Jewish place. If you remember the story, when Jesus walked once in Samaria, the Samaritan woman said, what are you doing here? You should not be passing here. Because Jewish people went to the other side of the Jordan River, to a place called Perea, in Jordan today. And they walked down on the east side of Jordan River until they got to Gilgal. Gilgal is the very place where the Jewish people coming out of Egypt after 40 years in the desert are crossing the river into the promised land. And Jesus does the very same thing. This is, by the way, the same place where John the Baptist is baptizing people. People come all the way from the north and east to Jerusalem. They cross the river. John the Baptist is in the water, baptizing. We'll talk about it in another chapter. Yet Jesus is crossing to the other side into Jericho, known as the city of Palm, known as the oldest city in the world. 10,000 years of existence of groups of people living in that city. And years earlier, before Jesus walks in that Levitical town called Jericho on the way up to Jerusalem. By the way, that was the last stop before you start your climbing up through the Judean desert and the Mount of Olives. Think about it. People walked for a week, 2 or 3, From Babylon, it took 3 weeks walking to Jerusalem on the pilgrimage holidays. Jericho is the last stop. You know, fruits and water and supply. You stay the night, Thursday night, and Friday you walk all the way up to Jerusalem to get to Jerusalem before Shabbat comes in. So Jesus is passing in Jericho. That's 2,000 years ago. But earlier than that, about 1,200 years earlier than that, the people of Israel, coming out of Egypt, walking 40 years in the desert, all around into Mount Nebo. Moses stands on Mount Nebo on the other side, looks at the promised land. He knows he's not going to get there. Joshua leads the people. Joshua walks a little further north, and in Gilgal, the same place where Jesus is crossing the river, he crosses the river with all the tribes of Israel. And they build a little monument. Each tribe brings one stone, the Gilgal, like a little mountain or hill of stones, and they get into the promised land. They park outside Jericho. It's a surrounded with walls city, well protected, and Joshua knows the only way to conquer the city is with the will and power of God. Physically, we cannot do it. They're stronger. And what Joshua does is turning around the city with all the people of Israel 7 times, just walking around the city. It's a long wave of people. Like if you lived in that city and you see all those people around you and they keep on walking, they keep on, thousands of them. There were not so many, but because it was like surrounding the city, it looked like so many. And on the 7th time, they used the trumpets and the horns and everybody blew together. Imagine, with the power of God, that noise broke down the walls, and the walls of Jericho came tumbling down. See the connection between Jesus walking the same way, crossing the river at the same spot, and getting into Jericho as the last supply before he gets to Jerusalem, and Joshua is conquering Jericho as the first city in the promised land. Thank you. I was asked a question which we will deal about later on, but I will answer the question, how come in the Garden of Gethsemane Jesus is going through maybe the most difficult moments in his life and the disciples fall asleep? I mean, how dare they? How can you allow yourself, Jesus that you followed for so long, your master, your Messiah, Jesus is going through the most difficult moments ever. He's under a terrible psychological, physical pressure. He's sweating blood, and you allow yourself fall asleep? Hello? Let's remember, friends, and this is the Jewish connection that I can bring and understand. Moments ago, they went through a Passover meal. Let me tell you a little about Passover meal. It's a long evening. There's a lot of talking and reading. There is a lot of eating, like the Jewish people know. Like mothers and all the daughters-in-law and everybody is preparing food, and you have to eat a lot. Yet more than that, you have to drink 4 cups of wine during that evening. 4 cups. We are not living in North America. We're not living in northern countries. We're not used to drink so much wine. 4 cups of wine in Israel is a lot. So you had that huge meal. You drink so much wine. And then you follow Jesus crossing the Kidron Valley, the Valley of Judgment, into the Garden of Gethsemane. And then he tells you, stay awake. And he's going to be alone on that rock in the garden. How can you stay awake after such a big, heavy meal and 4 glasses of wine? We can understand that. That's the answer to your question. Thank you very much. So thank you for the question. The question was, how come Nathanael, one of the disciples, says that strange sentence, what good can come out of Nazareth? Let me remind you, friends, Nazareth is a small Jewish village in the lower Galilee. A very small. They're talking about maybe 30 houses. Some would go to 100 houses. How many people live in 30 or 100 houses? 2,000? 200, excuse me? 400, 600 people? This is it. It's a small, forgotten unknown village in the Lower Galilee. Actually, if you look in all the Jewish scriptures, in none of them Nazareth appears. Every other place, if there was a famous rabbi, if there was a famous figure, someone that said something that was rather important to mention, they said Rabbi so-and-so from so-and-so. Nazareth is not mentioned in none of them. That is to say, it's a small, not important village. And when Nathanael from Cana hears that they're talking about the Messiah coming from Nazareth, automatically came out of his mouth, "What? This is impossible. You cannot tell me that from a small village somewhere in Cuba, Messiah would come. Was it in Washington, D.C., New York? Nobody would dare say, would the Messiah come from there? But from Nazareth, we can understand his sentence. What good can come out of that small little village in the Lower Galilee?" Thank you for the question.